Hello and welcome. My guest today is Shannon, founder and the CEO of the Estate and Asset Protection Law Firm, a certified elder law attorney who's built a seven-figure practice protecting families, independence, dignity, and assets. What sets Shannon apart is that she sat on both sides of the table, not just as attorney, but also as the family caregiver. Today, we are talking passion over profession, the mindset families need before they step into caregiving, and what it really takes to grow practice. Build. Shannon, welcome to the Go Switch.
Thank you so very much for having me today.
It's our pleasure. Shannon, why don't you introduce a little bit of your background and story, how you went into the legal field and how you started your practice in the first place?
Certainly. So, as you stated, Alex, my name is Shannon Pawley, and I am the owner of the Estate and Asset Protection Law Firm. And it's always interesting how life's journey, when you think it's going to go one way, it takes you another. And what I will emphasize is back in high school and college, I got my first introduction to elder care concerns by being a volunteer at nursing homes. That's where I saw the haves and I saw the have-nots. I saw those that had planning. I saw those that had advocates and those that had active friends and family. And then I saw those that were there in a crisis situation, no planning, sometimes solo seniors, meaning no friends or family. And even worse, silenced by mind or body with no legal advocate. Definitely a lasting handprint on my heart. So when I went to law school, that was one of my thoughts. But being a Gen Xer, I definitely, pursued the dollar bill for about 16 years. I was the vice president of litigation operations for, at the time, the largest debt collection law firm. But in that role, I lost my passion for law, and I didn't really like myself in that role that I was serving. So I got back to the passion of giving, the passion of advocating, the passion of ensuring those that don't have a voice are able to secure their voice through estate planning documents. And as I said, life takes you through a unique course because right about the time I refocused my profession, that's also about the time that my mother got diagnosed with vascular dementia. As a matter of fact, vascular dementia, it runs on the maternal side of my genetic background. My mother, she was the caregiver for my grandmother who had vascular dementia and ultimately transitioned. Then my mother was part of the caregiving team for her sister who also had vascular dementia until she transitioned. So when my mom got the diagnosis, she was hit with a kaleidoscope of emotions, not only from the aspect of knowing what was in store for her based upon what she saw with her grandmother and with her sister, but also unique perspective because what was in store for us as family caregivers. And when she felt her life was completely spiraling out of control, in stepped the counselor and attorney counselor at law, and me realizing exactly how therapeutic estate planning is. And in that capacity, my mom, who felt she was losing control, I mean, you can't have a more intimate betrayal than of your own mind or body, but she was able to regain focus, to be able to ensure her voice was secured in her estate planning document, strategy, and journey, so that as her life progressed, and unfortunately, as the dementia silenced her due to its progression, her documents were still there to guide us the whole way as to how her independent instructions were. That is why I do what I do. I want families to have that guidance, and more importantly, I want my clients to have a voice. Everyone deserves a life of significance, no matter what life brings before them. And that's why I do what I do.
Do you think it's possible to work in your field without something that connects a practicing attorney that deeply to the field the way it does for you? Because it's not just knowing the law, it's having the empathy and having the passion for being able to help somebody that in the future might not be able to help themselves.
I don't think that a person can work in this field effectively and be a true advocate and guide, because in this field, we're dealing with people either in a very traumatic stage of their life with some form of medical diagnosis or concern, or we're dealing with them when they're healthy, but we're forcing them to think about those things. And these are topics that are taboo. in American culture. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about what's going to happen when people are ill or if the worst case scenario happens. And for that reason, while I think that people can perform the job as a job, and I've met many attorneys in estate planning and elder law that it's a job, but I will tell you the client experience is not the same because you don't have that connection, you don't have that advocacy, you're just drafting documents. And when it comes to elder law, when it comes to estate planning, it's not documents. It's a self-directed strategy that we have the honor of walking beside our clients with as they create them and ensure that they're properly implemented by their implementation team.
I think in law, it's always very tempting to think that to any problem there is a right answer. And I think having the degree of empathy and nuance shows that not necessarily there is a right answer, that every situation is different. And again, you need to be very empathetic towards your client, towards their family, to figure out exactly what's ultimately has to be done, not necessarily just reading the law, the best practices that might seem universal. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%. Every case is unique. Every family is different. Every individual has unique concerns. And part of your voice is your individualism. We are not all vanilla ice cream. If we were all vanilla ice cream, then AI could draft anything for you. Then LegalZoom can be completed at any point because there's no life experience factors coming in. But there's so much that happens through your life experiences that molds what your goals are, what your wishes are, what your history is that you now know you want to avoid, but also that whole goal. So I agree 100% with you. I will say that there may be some overarching themes of proper guidance, but the true implementation of the plan, that's very personal, that's very individualized, and that should always be self-directed by the client under the guidance of the attorneys, advising them as to what different paths they can walk down.
You mentioned that you spent a significant number of years working for the largest debt collection firm in the country, and that beat the empathy out of you. What were some of the things that maybe you didn't have to relearn when it came to empathy, that you still had to protect some distance when you're working with the clients to be effective at your job? Or is it something that you had to completely do 180 on?
Where I've had some employees that are overly empathetic. And the problem when people are overly empathetic, we're not your psychologist, we're not your counselor. We're not properly qualified to even have that. We're here to listen, but we're not here to provide counseling in that aspect. And I will say that in some aspects, I didn't have that when I switched back to this passion that I started my legal career with, and now I'm bookending it on the other end. But also with the need of empathy, it is a fine line because also you cannot get caught up in their story. Because if you're so caught up in their story, you can't see the forest for the trees. You've got to be able to keep an aesthetic distance with an understanding, a very compassionate understanding of their strife and their goals. But I do agree with you. Empathy can be a double-edged sword if it is not balanced appropriately.
Would you maybe have an example of a situation where it's almost like you think you want something, but actually you don't situation, where you helped maybe a client and their family think through an issue, where you were able to take that step back and say, I'm empathetic to what's going on, but here's how you need to think about it, and maybe you help them come to a better conclusion and a better outcome from what they were initially asking to do.
So I don't know if this is going exactly what you're asking here, Alex, but the first story that came to my mind was very often when I'm working with a client, I'm usually working with the client and a family member or family members. And a lot of times, which I'll talk about in a little bit, about the caregiver mindset, a lot of times when people step into the caregiver role, the only caregiver they're familiar with is the parent-child relationship. And unfortunately, that doesn't work when you're now a caregiver for your parent. And I had a situation where a daughter was serving as a caregiver for her father, who had a dementia diagnosis, and he was having a very hard time with it. In the middle of me talking with him, he actually made a comment that was a declaration of suicidal tendencies and intent. Immediately, the daughter shut him down. Don't say that, Dad. I've told you to stop saying that. That's why we're here, so we can have a plan. And of course, I had to quiet the daughter and say, you've got to listen to your father here. I go, because there's usually more to this, but if you're shutting him down in front of me when you don't know me and you're supposed to be in your best behavior, I'm concerned how you're shutting him down elsewhere. Well, he just feels that this is all that he has to explain. So when I'm trying to find out terminal instructions, he's looking at it through the wrong lens. And unfortunately, you're forcing that lens to stay before him.
Mm.
This is where I stopped. I put them in contact with a professional peer of mine that was a family counselor and made the comment, I want you to call and speak with this person, come back to me in a week or two after you spoke to them, see if you have a little bit more clarity as we start talking about terminal instructions. And it did assist there. But like I said, initially, he wasn't in the right mindset and his daughter wasn't in the right mindset as a caregiver. And that's kind of one of the reasons, like you and I have talked prior, one of my big focuses always is in estate planning. It's not just the documents, not just securing the client's voice, but ensuring that the implementation team, the caregivers, have a clear course to follow for success so that they don't, in their passion of loving for their parent, because trust me, that daughter had extreme love for her father, but unfortunately did not know how to properly respond to it with that type of an interaction. So, like I said, I don't know if that's exactly what you were asking there, but that was the first story that came to my mind when you started talking there, Alex.
No, that certainly is, I think, very instructive about the different dynamics, because the issue at hand is very difficult for all parties involved, and they might not have the necessary the tools to address it correctly. And I think that's why it's important to have the right advisors in terms of the law, but also in terms of the other practices. And one of the interesting things that you said when we were talking before is that you have this idea of how the person should be treated like a Fortune 500 company. And I'd love for you to elaborate what that means for you and how you came to that framework.
Certainly. So, kind of like what I was just talking about, just as it's important to understand the client's wishes, to secure their voices of independence and intention within their documents, it's equally important to make sure that their caregivers understand what it means and they enter into the role with the right type of a mindset. Like I mentioned previously, too often when people get into a caregiver role, the only caregiver role they're familiar with is parent child. And the problem is not only is that disrespectful for the relationship, but in a parent child relationship, you're dealing with a person that is very dependent on you and progressively over time becomes more independent. When you're a caregiver, it's the opposite. They're independent and over time they're becoming more dependent. So, as I think mindset is extremely important, I started to tell people, do not do the parent of the parent scenario or focus. They need to really focus at this whole caregiving relationship as though they're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And the biggest thing I always emphasize with Fortune 500 companies, it all starts with vision, mission, and core values. And it may sound odd that I say you need to sit down and figure this out at the beginning of your caregiver journey, but it is important. What is the vision that you have in the perfect world with the rose-colored glasses and the magic fairy wand? What is the perfect world you are trying to create for your parent through the remaining portion of their life journey as they're requiring care? Then from there, as we have that vision statement, that goal, that perfect ending, now we're going to talk about, well, how are you going to, via focus on your mission here, on the day-to-day implementation, to support to that goal. And then finally, core values. What are the core values that you as a caregiver, and when you're bringing on other individuals or you're making decisions, what are the core values that you always want to be at the foundation? The beauty of starting here is so that as time progresses and you start to have a difficult decision, or you don't have a proper response, you now have a measuring stick. Going back to those core values, ask the question, well, if I do this, is this still meeting those original core values that were of utmost importance to me? And if it is, you know you're going down the right course. You're keeping that mission and that focus proper under those core values. But if it's not, you know, it's time to do a self correction. The other thing that's beautiful too, when we start talking about the vision, mission, and core values, if you're dealing with your parent or family member that still has cognitive capacity, they're going to be chiming in on all of this. What's important to them, too? And then it goes beyond that when I say the Fortune 500 CEO mindset. It goes beyond just having that. It's also going to go down to, what does a CEO of a Fortune 500 company have? Oh, they have a business plan. And in the business plan, they always have redundancies and they always have catastrophic planning on worst case scenario. Guess what? As a caregiver, you need that. Guess what? Fortune 500 companies, they have a budget. Guess what? You need to have a budget. Caregiving can get expensive really, really quick. And you can't have it to where you deplete early on to the point that you cannot fully live out to the fullness of that person's anticipated lifespan. It might mean, just like the banks in 2008, they had to get a governmental bailout. Well, guess what? Part of this planning and part of this budgeting might be that just like those banks, you're going to need a governmental buyout and start doing governmental program planning, such as Medicaid. And let's not forget about the importance of your board of directors. Steve Jobs is not the one that made Apple as successful as it was. He was the figurehead, he was the face, but it was not all his efforts. It's coming down to those board of directors, the CEO, the CFO, the information technologies, and etc. Well, just like he had that, now let's flip to the caregiver. Who's your board of directors for the CEO that is your, or for that Fortune 500 company that's your parent? Well, that's going to be your legal advisors, your financial advisors, your tax advisors, your insurance advisors. These are people that complement weaknesses that you don't have, not because you're stupid, but it's because it's not your specialty. You can't be a specialist in everything. So bring in the specialists that can supplement to ensure that you're always, once again, focusing on that vision, mission, and core values. And then lastly, because very often when you're a family caregiver, there's more family than just you. Just like when you're dealing with a Fortune 500 company, there's more people have invested in the company beyond the C-suite. So we got to have those shareholder meetings. And just happens as the CEO of the Fortune 500 company that is mom or dad, those shareholders, that's the family members. You need to have regular meetings with them. You need to advise them what is going on. What's the anticipation? Always conclude each meeting with an anticipated next meeting. Make sure it's on the calendar. Make sure it goes invite out to everybody. So that if you start going down this type of a mindset, not only are you setting yourself up for success by having a plan, not only are you setting yourself up for success by making sure you have the best people in your corner to support in your caregiving needs, but also you're going to be ensured that you have the support and clear communication with the family to ensure that there's no resentment, there's no confusion, and there's no anger because of the silence that they don't understand what you're going through and how you're trying to promote the best interest of the parent.
I really like that model of thinking about it because I think it highlights one, the importance of the network and having the right group, whether it's internal board of directors or more expanded network and shareholders, and also the importance of communications. And from our personal experience, I come from immigration background, immigration law, and we would often see our clients come to us, they would need the same variety of services if they're moving to a new country. In addition to sorting out their immigration challenges, whether it's a visa or a passport, they would need to have a property, so they would need an estate agent. They would have to deal with their taxes, so they need tax planning. They might be needing financial advisor, education consultant for their children, and so on. And it was always fascinating to me that there was a very big gap between firms that are very intentional about building those networks so they can advise their clients and they can introduce that network to them. Just like in your example, when you heard certain things in how the conversation went with the client, you were able to point them to the right specialist to have more nuanced conversation. But at the same time, there are a lot of firms that only try to do their part of law, and they basically try to say everything else is not our concern. We cannot be involved in that. And I think that's quite short-sighted. It leads to the worst outcome for the clients, and it also leads to the worst service from the firm itself. So the first thing I just want to double click on, how were you approaching building that extended board of directors for your clients, building those connections you could introduce? Did you have a strategy for building it with your practice, or is that just something that grew organically over the years?
So it has definitely grown organically throughout the years. But what I will say is I'm very active in community engagement and involvement. For example, I am part of the board of directors with the Fraser House, which is a charitable organization and foundation for special needs individuals, whether they be children or adults. I'm actively engaged. I'm one of the founding members of the Decatur, Georgia chapter of ACAP, Adult Children of Aging Parents. I am constantly working with local insurance groups such as Kaiser Permanente. I am actively engaged, and I'm the only attorney on the Aging in Atlanta initiative with the Atlanta Journal Constitution. And then lastly, I'm engaged with our local television groups here. Through all of that, I've had the honor of being on the stage with many amazing people. And what I love is they share the same passion as I do. And they have the same goals and respect and focus with the client journey and the client expectation. So over time, both through just intimate experience, client specific, or more specifically through these connections I'm getting, birds of a feather flock together. And I'm very happy to say, whether it be my choice of location or just the fact that I'm a beacon that attracts similar persons, I've had a great experience with making those connections. And the beautiful thing is, I make a connection with them, which means I'm also now connected to their referral network, which just goes out with referral network. It keeps going out and out and out to the point that together we can so more beautifully support our clients on their journey, that I just praise every opportunity I have to interact with persons and to brainstorm with persons, because I do think that life is more than Google reviews. Because, of course, Google reviews, let's be completely honest. Who's the one that does Google reviews in most cases? It's the person that is usually upset. They're at an emotional extreme. Either they're exuberant and they just want to sing the praises, or, which is in most cases, unfortunately, it's the person that's unhappy. And that's the person that's going to hit every single channel to air their grievances, which is important to know. But that's why you can't determine your referral network by doing a Google search and looking at Google reviews. Important, but there's so much more to that. That's where you have to have the connection, because I don't refer anybody unless I believe they have the same character as myself and the same focuses, because that is my reputation that I'm placing upon them with every single referral. And I feel the same thing in return for every referral that they give me. So yes, very important. It has happened over time, very organic, but I think it's simply because of the community engagement and involvement that I have, being introduced to other similarly situated professionals that have expertise as well beyond me, and then those networks of their networks that go beyond me and my own personal reach.
That makes a lot of sense. And I like your comment about reviews as well. I think in many cases, when it comes not just to legal services, but to many other things, Google reviews, testimonials in general, they're a symptom that they are not the underlying condition. Very few businesses actually take the time when they have a successful client, not the client that upset, but the successful client when they did exactly what they're supposed to take that extra time to say, why were you happy with our services? Is there anything else that we could have delivered to make the experience even more extraordinary and to make sure that everything that you possibly need is taken care of? Quite often professionals, they do their work, they close the file, and that's the end of that. But the companies that are actively pursuing those conversations, and it doesn't have to be documented on Google reviews or any places, but the important part is that that conversation takes place when the final invoice is settled, when everything is done, that there is a time to say, why did you enjoy working with us? Was it everything that you were expecting? Maybe you were expecting something else, but we didn't cover that. Because I think for any business, especially in services, and especially when there is a high level of emotional intelligence required as well to truly support clients here, that could be a very interesting part of the insights. And whether it's through the network or those conversations, is something that I don't think is happening often enough, but we'd love to encourage more businesses to do that.
I agree 100%. I always make the comment that the drafting that I do and the strategies I learn, I am a amazing attorney today, but next week, next month, next year, I'm going to be even stronger based upon the experiences and the interactions like what you're talking about, because my clients and their experiences make me stronger. Even the ones that actually reach out to me and have expressed complaints, I'm grateful for that. Honestly, I'm grateful for the people that reach out to me with a complaint almost as much, if not better, than those that are reaching out to me with a praise, because just the fact that they are sharing their experience with me, I find that extremely valuable, because the positive client, yeah, they're going to give you a lot of referrals because you're front of mind. But the problem is, then time goes on. But the ones that have a bad experience, that stays forever. And we don't want to repeat it. And also, I want to make sure that I can remedy as best in my capability. So I agree 100% with you about those. I'll call them like a client exit interview. Very.
Certainly. One of the things, Shannon, you also mentioned when we were talking earlier, you said that you don't want to have cheerleaders in the business, you want to have accountability. So, what does that mean for you in terms of both client relationships, but also in terms of the advisors you bring on to grow your practice?
So we learn by being surrounded by people that are not identical to us, that challenge us, and that hold us accountable. The problem with cheerleaders, and I want my team to be excited. I want my team to be happy. I want my team to be proud. But I also want them to hold me accountable just as much as I hold them, because that's how you're going to grow. And so often we don't see things other people do because we are blind to it, or we are softened to it without realizing, the delivery, the effect, or etc. But also, don't forget that while you want people to support you and you want a supportive environment, supportive does not mean cheerleader all the time. Supportive is helping people to grow, to become better. And that is identifying weaknesses and growth opportunities and support in the implementation and development of them. One of the things you and I talked about prior is my belief that you need to work on your mindset to best succeed as a business owner. To me, that is the number one best investment that I've ever done as a business owner, is working on my mindset so that I don't spiral when things happen. Or if I start to spiral, I catch myself to get myself out of the spiral. Because there's so many times, and trust me, I've been to multiple bar events, both in Michigan as well as Georgia, where it almost feels like people get around and almost like they are comparing their battle wounds about who has the worst battle wound. There's no benefit to that. And that's not the group I want to be around. I don't want to compare battle wounds. I want to compare successes and growth. And that's why I'm very selective about who I open my mind two. And I do have a group of three other professional female business owners across the United States that we've been masterminding together for the last 4+ years. And in that, not only are we working on each other's growth and we're explaining what's worked for us and what didn't work, but it's also where we're holding each other accountable. And if somebody's spiraling or they're trying to hide, we call them out. We call them out in love, but we call them out. That's what you need for growth. That's what you need for successful business, in my view. But also, even if it's not a business, just personal development, you need that. That's one of the things that I try to do with some of my clients, especially the caregivers, when they start expressing, kind of like what I did with the one example I said about the daughter with the father that made the life-ending contemplative responses in front of me. It wasn't to chastise him or her, but it was to say, this is an issue you've got to address. You can't keep avoiding it. You know, that's what you do. That's accountability, and that's accountability with love. So that's, I think, is such a big thing, because accountability is different than discipline. Discipline is all the punishment with no opportunity of a learning experience. Accountability is acknowledgement of the issue with growth opportunity and support to process that growth opportunity.
I think probably accountability also gives a lot more nuance because, to your point, discipline, it's easy to set a business process or an activity and almost very tempting to put the blinders on, saying we have to do this no matter what. But with the accountability, especially if you have a peer group like you described of other business owners where you can share notes, you can see what worked, what didn't work, you can add a lot of nuance to the situation. And maybe you should persist and do something even though it's difficult, but maybe you can find a nuance that actually says it's goals for a pivot, different approach with the client, maybe different activity that requires more attention in the firm. And I think that's quite important. So, Shannon, I want to ask you specifically within the context of business growth, marketing for your practice. You mentioned that a big part of growing your firm has been that organic network of referrals that you build over the years. You're very active in different communities as well. When it comes from your experience, from your peer group, what is the significance of being visible, especially now when there is so much choice and everybody can go online and look for specialists, and whether it's reviews that, like we discussed before, might not be indicative of how good somebody is? What's the significance of being seen, and what are the steps that you and your peer group are doing to remain visible for the right type of client to be able to find you?
I think one of the biggest significance about being visible and being visible in multiple different venues, not just in a lawyer's office, because that's the hardest step that people have, is to have a lawyer's office, but going to a senior fair, not as threatening. Watching the TV, not that threatening. Doing a Zoom review or etc. That's not as threatening. And I think that's where you're doing all of these different outreaches, because you got to remember, and I think this is common knowledge, people buy from people they like. And you have to make that connection quickly, because you're never going to get to your sales presentation if you don't make that connection in an environment that person is comfortable, that will then open up their ears to learn more and to seek more information. So I think that's very, very important with these community outreaches. Further, there's something amazing when you get a referral, because they're handing their goodwill that they've already created, the respect that's already been created, the like that they've already gotten with that interaction with the client, and when they're handing it off to you, and vice versa. One of the reasons I know that I've interacted with several different persons, such as financial advisors, that have wanted to do a relationship with me, but they're wanting to have an exclusive relationship. And I always make the comment, absolutely not. Because I'm not the right attorney for everybody. And I acknowledge that. And I want you to find the right attorney. Even if you get the education from me, if I'm not the right one, it's far more important to me that you get that end result. Because once again, there's more than enough business out there. Anybody that believes that there's only a fixed amount of business and that's why they got to squirrel everything, you can't receive if you're closed off like this. Same thing, if you're grasping on something so hard, you're not holding on to it, you're hurting yourself, just like what I'm doing right now with my nails. I'm digging them in because I'm holding on so hard. People got to be observant of that, because this is where you've got to be gracious. You've got to be a person that gives, and you give without an intent of a receipt back, because that's where you are going to have true freedom as a business owner, so that you're not trying to review ROI with every single thing that you do. ROI is also goodwill, which is not financially ascertainable to value in many cases, especially for a small business. We start talking about Coca-Cola, you can value goodwill there, but that's not what we have at the smaller business level. And even with most law firms, unless you're a Morgan and Morgan, that does have a goodwill, even the larger law firms in the state, it's not to that extreme. So you've got to have those interactions. You've got to support. Always remember, well, it's more touches now due to AI and technology, but what used to be always be referred to as the law of seven touches, that it takes seven touches before a person will actively move forward to engage with you. And this is why I always make the comment, I am not a transactional attorney. I am a relationship attorney. I want a relationship with you. I want you to think of me and my team the same thing like you think of with your family doctor. And with your family doctor, you trust them because you like them. And you're going to go to your family doctor. If you're having chest pains, for example, and you're not sure what's going on, you're going to go to your family doctor to ask for their guidance and some assessment. You don't expect them to do the open heart surgery. You don't expect them to be able to do all the testing to confirm what's going on, but you trust them enough to get their surface level evaluation, and then that referral, because you trust them so much, that referral is the right way to go. That's what I think is important. That's why I make the comment about the relationship. That's why I make the comment about the connection. That's why I make the comment of being there to support. And sometimes, trust me, there's been many people I'm going to call it, fangirls and boys that attend my weekly webinars that I've never physically met. They've never moved forward with any actions with me. And some of them, they moved forward, they went with somebody else, which is fine. But yet they still attend these these webinars I have every week out of gratitude and appreciation on the education. Guess what? That type of a person, they're invaluable. Even if they didn't come to me, they're still going to talk to other people about the value that they're getting, how much they like me. They may not have gone with me, but they're going to add other people in. And I just think that that's just the most important thing here, is just to realize that you have to give with no expectation of return. You have to look at each interaction, each experience that you're having, give the people you're working with, give them grace. Think that whatever is happening with the best of intentions. Because if you start there as a business owner with community outreach, with sales consultations, with client engagement, with client post-service interviews, start there and you're already like 10 feet ahead of most people.
That's a lot of really good points you just made. But I think one of the highlights for me personally is your hanging on analogy, because this is the difference we see between bigger successful firms and the smaller firms that are struggling. And partly, I also want to say, I think it's an attribution problem of where the clients are actually coming from. Because on the surface, it's always easy to say it's a referral because that's the last touch that happened before the contract was signed. Underneath, there is a lot of relationship building. There is a lot of attending webinars and hearing good things about other people in the network. And it took some steps to arrive to that conclusion. And the firms that don't want to do that work, and then they have to grasp at every opportunity going their way, they end up not being selective. Maybe they're not the right fit for the client, and that causes friction, and that keeps them stuck on not doing their best work and not serving the clients, which then creates just a negative loop of maybe negative experiences or negative reviews. The firms that are larger and more successful, they are very mindful about who they say yes to and who they say we are not the right fit for you, we cannot help you, while still giving a lot of value, like you said, giving away without expectation, because that builds a lot of the fundamental goodwill that in the end results those ADL's clients finding and the network growing. So I think it's super important. One of the things I want to close with today is your model of how you advise your clients. You mentioned that they should be treated as Fortune 500 companies. They need to have a board of directors. When you think about your firm and growing your firm, what is your version of the board of advisors, your peer network that you mentioned, and what are some of the other people that instrumental that you turn to for the advice to plan, maybe considering some of the things that unknowns, that's something you haven't considered but being brought to your attention. What does that look like for you in 2026?
I think that one of the things that I've definitely been very focused on as part of my growth is to be in with a business coach. I think business coaches are very important, just like mindset coaches are, but they serve different purposes. Mindset's working on you so you don't get caught in your head, but the business coaches, they're the ones that are going to help you with the analytics. They're going to help you with suggestions of how to move the needle in certain ways. And they're very valuable, but what I even find even more valuable beyond just the coaches is these coaching groups I belong to. They have clients across the United States, different areas of practice. And 3 times a year with the current group that I'm with, we all get together for a weekend mastermind. And we start to create relationships with people in other fields of practice and other states. Not only is that helping out with the referral relationship, but also we as humans, myself included, although I'm getting a little bit better about it, I'd like to think, is we always think that the problems we're having are unique to us, or they're unique to your area of the law, or they're only unique to your state or your city or your judge that you're before. There's something valuable when you get together with other people that are open in sharing their stories, sharing their struggles and their frictions, and sharing what they've done to be successful to see if it might work for you too. That's very, very important. That's part of the growth. Not only having the person working on your mindset or so you're out of your head, not only the person that's the business coach that's giving you guidance of how to run a business. We talked about this yesterday, Alex. Law school does not prepare you for the practice of law, and definitely not to become a business owner. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons so many attorneys have a hard time hanging out their own shingle is because a lot of people, depending on what area of law you go into, you're going into it because you're usually a very solitary person in a lot of areas. So you're not naturally set for the community engagement, the marketing, the sales, or et cetera. And there's little tricks that you can do there, but that's also where you bring other team members in. And that's the other great thing with this peer relationship I have through my coaching group that I'm with, my attorney business coaching, is we also work together about what we have done for peer and employee development. And sometimes we'll have employee of one firm, we'll introduce them to somebody who does the same job at another firm. So they realize, one, they're not alone. 2, the struggles they're having, other people have it. And number 3, they're going to be able to share success stories as motivation as well as inspiration for their own individual success. Because just as it's important that I'm working on myself with mindset, just as it's important I'm working on the firm as a business with my business coach, it's also important for the development of my team. And sometimes that development that goes the farthest is when they realize the struggles they're having are not unique to them. It's not unique to their area. And other people have or are currently experiencing the same thing, and the successes that they've had, because there's just something comforting to know that you're not alone. And as business owners, we got to realize, just like we don't want to feel that we're alone, our team doesn't want to feel like they're alone either, especially if they're doing some type of a unique job that other people have never done in the firm or could inspire them. Give them the connection, give them the development, give them the support.
I think that's amazing advice. Very, very, very needed to I think get past that experience that something is unique, to be able to share it with somebody. And for the audience listening, a big part of what we do at Iris Media as well is talking to the law firms about their marketing to make sure that they don't get stuck on some of the unique challenges that they're going through, but helping them to show the roadmap, to show what works for other firms and create a plan of action so that they can bring the clients that they want without necessarily breaking their firm or breaking what they want to do. Shannon, for somebody that's interested in your work and they want to know more about what you're doing this year and beyond, where can they find more information online?
Okay, so best place to start is with our website, which is www.elder, E-L-D-E-R, law, L-A-W, Georgia, Georgia.com. That's the best place to start. That's going to be able to give you links to our social media, links to our FAQs, links to some of the material that we have available for downloading inspiration. For example, I wrote a book focusing on caregiver mindset, that CEO perspective. Free download there to start you out with that whole idea of proper mindset. That's where it starts and it grows from there. You can also see our events calendar if you want to go one step beyond with either a webinar or maybe one of my live events, or go to one of my big events where I'm speaking before like 500-600 people with some of these larger events in Metro Atlanta and Georgia. That's where you start. And from there, it's almost like a choose your own adventure book that I used to love when I was in elementary school. Choose your own adventure of not only your educational pursuit, but also your intimacy of understanding more about myself and my team. Thank you, Alex.
Of course, we will make sure to include the links as well so somebody can start their adventure at that place. Shannon, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so very much. Have a great day, Alex.